Good morning, and so thank you, Martha, and thank you, Jill, for all your help with these potlucks. Potlucks, I feel, are an important part of our community life. Those of you who like to share in the community life of IMC, staying and hanging out for those are a wonderful way. So, as I think some of you know, that ever since the Hamas invasion of Israel, I think my public talks have been a response to that in some way or other. And I'll continue that today. But I'd like to do maybe a preface to it all that maybe is important to understand, that I do so as a Buddhist teacher, grounded in Buddhist values as I understand them, and as someone who doesn't live with the urgency of violence that's happening in the present, lethal violence that's happening in the present. If I was living with that urgency, I would probably, if I was teaching at all, I would teach maybe differently. And coming here to speak about this today, I've become certainly alarmed by what's happening in the Middle East, but I'm also alarmed by how divisiveness is spreading around the globe, and that people who were friends or just kind of neutral with each other now are seen as enemies because of the strong divide between opinions and who's right and who's wrong and who's from my side and who's, if you're not from my side, then clearly you're against my side. And so it's to not take sides is often seen as by both parties as taking sides for the other side, and it can be difficult to speak up and offer an opinion, a view, which is not what people would like to hear, but then maybe gives birth to more divisiveness, more anger. So I'll start with a clear kind of Buddhist grounding in this kind of topic of violence and quarrels and disputes, and then say a few things that are directly concerns of what's happening in the Middle East. And then we'll see what happens then. So I'll begin with what for me is one of the very valued, most important top 5 maybe teachings from the Buddha. And maybe I don't want to put those top 5 in the hierarchy of one's the highest or most important, but this is like for me one of the most important teachings that I'm inspired by and live my life by. It concerns who is a wise person. A wise person of great wisdom does not intend for one's own affliction, or for the affliction of others, or for the affliction of both self and others. Rather, a wise person thinks only for one's own welfare, the welfare of others, the welfare of both, and the welfare of the whole world. In this way, it is in this way that a wise person is of great wisdom. So there's wisdom, and then there's great wisdom. And this week in my morning teaching, I talked about the Buddha's teaching about what's beautiful and what's more beautiful than beautiful. And what's beautiful is living an ethical life. What's more beautiful is encouraging, prompting others to live an ethical life of not killing, not stealing. And so here's a call that we want to live in the world actively. We want to live in the world responding to it. But from a Buddhist point of view, it's not one that is going to set up more divisiveness, but it is one that wants to address the unethical issues of our world. Not be silent, and not demonize anyone, but figure out this very difficult task, seemingly impossible task, to promote, to help others live an ethical life, which from a Buddhist point of view is how we can live the best life. The greatest good comes for ourselves when we live an ethical life that, from the Buddha's point of view, is actually impeccable. The standard of the Buddha is very high of how much we're not going to live a life that doesn't cause harm. Whether we think that that's unreasonable, and that's a question we all have to face. But this one here, that one lives concerned for the welfare of everyone. We ourselves are not excluded. Sometimes with teachings of altruism, you're supposed to kind of sacrifice yourself for the benefit of others. There's no such idea in Buddhism. We're as important as anybody else, than our welfare. In fact, our welfare sometimes is emphasized in Buddhism as the paramount thing that we should be concerned with, because when we're really well, then we're in the best position to support other people to be well. If we're spiritually ill, sick or underdeveloped or something, we have so much less to be able to support and help and recognize and encourage for others. But it's not limited to self. Then it's maybe selfish. But also be concerned for the welfare of others. And then this wonderful concept, concern for the welfare of both. And for me, that concern for the welfare of the both has to do with who we are as a community, the us. And then for the welfare for the whole world. And it's a life that thinks it's possible to look for the greatest good for everyone involved. And that is not an easy thing to do. And one of the places that I've been involved where that was a challenge was I chaired an ethics committee for about 15 years, where I was the primary responder to all kinds of ethical complaints, where there was a whole range of things that came, but there was usually a conflict between two people. And there was someone was a complainer, and then there was a person who they were complaining about. The victim and the perpetrator. Occasionally we might be appropriate in some people's vocabulary. And the approach that I took was, how do we find, given what happened, not denying if something bad happened, unethical happened, not denying it, not kind of papering over it, but how do we address all the issues here that need to be addressed and consider what's the greatest good for everybody involved? And for people who were the victim, that was a hard thing to hear sometimes. And so part of the discussions was to help the person who was the victim to understand that this was possible, that we were concerned about the victim's greatest good, really wanted to take care of that person, but there was no need to ignore the well-being of the person who had the problem. In fact, taking care of them took care of the whole situation better. And sometimes for the person who was complained against, we had to sometimes convince them that they had to. It was very important for them to live that there was consequences they had to live by. So they had to be changed. They had to go through some kind of process of something. And that sometimes they protested, right? This is ridiculous. I don't need to do this, or this is not right. But we convinced them that, yes, maybe that's true, but the whole needs you to do that. And so the greater good comes from this. And it's not really very harmful for you. It just takes time. And so then, and so usually what happened with this process, when it went well and somehow didn't get interrupted in the middle or something, everyone came out happy. And even more important was that the wider community that I was supporting began to trust the ethics committee. That when the ethics committee called them up and said, I'm calling from the ethics committee, that rather than having their heart sink, my hope was that they would smile. Oh, great. Someone has the greater good for me concerned. And okay, this is not, maybe it won't be all easy, but like this is going to be a good process to go through. Conflict doesn't have to be a loss-loss for everyone, win-loss kind of situation. It can be a win-win for everyone involved. But it takes a lot more time to do that. So this teaching here, that the wise person, someone considers the good for everyone involved, this to me is, I think, speaks to a heart that is not going to live divisively. A heart that's not going to see anyone as enemy, but it's going to see everyone with the goodness of the best place in our heart in which we gaze upon the world. And so I'll come back to that. And then related to this is, I don't know if it's a top 5 teachings of the Buddha, but it's up there pretty high for me. And it's particularly valuable this time, and I think I've read it this last couple of weeks even. Hatred never ends through hatred. By non-hate alone does it end. This is an ancient truth. Sometimes this quote is read, hatred never ends through hatred, by love alone does it end. To me, that's more inspiring. Non-hatred, for me, is more attainable. And so I'll settle for non-hatred. The ancient language, this word, when you have this negative word non-hatred, it's often said it implies the positive. And what's nice about this is that the positive is a wider range than just love. And so maybe love is not exactly what's called for. Maybe generosity is called for, or something else. And then in the same discussion, they abused me, attacked me, defeated me, robbed me. For those carrying on like this, hatred does not end. They abused me, attacked me, defeated me, robbed me. For those not carrying on like this, hatred ends. The people who have been abused, attacked, defeated, robbed, can feel like they're justified to hate. In fact, hate might seem as a necessary means by which we're going to defend ourselves, care for ourselves, have justice in the world. And I don't feel like I want to, or capable of, when someone has been harmed, to want to argue that's not the case. That's too uncomfortable. It feels almost disrespectful, or putting salt in a wound, which is quite deep. And he abused me, hatred does not end this way. By criticizing others, by yelling at them and saying, the idea here is not to say in some simple way, I was abused, I was attacked, but it's the blaming, the attacking that this quote is criticizing. And the final, there's four verses here, and the final one here that's kind of, I see as a set. Maybe it's supposed to get our attention to change how we live our lives. Many do not realize we here must die. For those who realize this, quarrels end. So I don't know how that strikes you. And sometimes quarrels have ended when we realize that the blood of those who die is more valuable than oil, more valuable than a lot of things we're trying to preserve. So the Buddha addressed the issue of quarrels, of disputes, and for years I read these teachings where he addresses it, some of them, in detail, as I didn't quite, they were kind of flat for me, didn't kind of inspire me in some way until recently. And there's teachings where he talks about the conditions that lead to quarrels. And it's layers of conditions where the first layer sets the conditions in place for the next layer, kind of a more activated layer. And that sets the conditions for a more activated layer. It kind of goes like, until finally we're so activated we're fighting with each other. And so the first one gives a 5-part kind of conditions or 4 parts that lead to quarrels. And the first, so there's quarrels, and the immediate precondition for quarrels is a word which challenges a lot of people when they hear it. So if you're challenged, you're in good company. Cherishing. Cherishing is a condition. Now, is cherishing a necessary condition for conflict? Is cherishing wrong or bad? We don't have to see it as wrong or bad, but cherishing, the way cherishing is done sometimes leads to all kinds of problems. The kind of powerful representative example, some of you might know, is in the Lord of the Rings, Gollum cherishing the ring, his precious. I mean, if that's what cherishing is, we're all in trouble. Of course, that's not how we all cherish. Maybe there's innocent, harmless cherishing of things, but there's a way of leading into what we cherish. We want to hold on to it. We want to keep it to ourselves. We don't want to share it with anyone. There's attachment that comes. And so when there's attachment with cherishing, then we're defensive, then we're we're avaricious, all kinds of things happening. But before quarrels, there's something that we're cherishing, an opinion, an idea, a thing, a place, possession, something. Before cherishing, the precondition for that is having some kind of desire. Now, here we go, these Buddhists always making desire into a problem. It isn't that all desires are a problem, but there has to be some desire for us to want to cherish. And some desires, occasionally some of us, will accidentally have a problematic desire. None of you, of course. The precondition for desire is pleasantness and unpleasantness. Or liking and not liking is another way of translating it. To have something we like and not like, then we have a desire for more of it, or desire to have it, or push it away, or not have it. And is it wrong to do that? No, of course not. But it's kind of has to be there first in order for us to want to desire, have a desire for something we like, or some desire for something we don't like to go away. And then for the Buddha, in this particular teaching, the last thing, condition, the bottom layer, the first layer, is simple sense contact. Just simply being in the world, going about your own business, and having the wind against your skin, seeing the clouds in the sky, not today, and just tasting your food. The most basic sense contact. Is there any problem with that? Not necessarily. But if it produces a liking that we are attached to, and the liking that we're attached to produces desire for more of what we're attached to, that produces a cherishing which has attachment built into it. And then what's happening is that we're getting increasingly activated. There's more agitation, there's more higher order thinking, processing, wanting, motivation, operating in the mind, all of which is kind of increasingly stressful, even though it might seem pleasant all along. And it's, as we go along, also, the focus of attention becomes narrower. If you're just sitting quietly in meditation, for example, and just allowing all the sense experiences to come and go and move through you, it can be deeply relaxing. But as soon as you have something that you like, the liking of it, the attention is a little bit more kind of now tightened up and focused on the liking. And if you want more of it, the attention gets more focused around the desire. And if you cherish it, now you're even more focused and tight around this thing. And then if you get into a dispute, some of us are capable of getting into arguments and disputes and conflicts, minding our own business, sitting, meditating. No one has to be around, and suddenly she said, he said, they said, and like, how could it be that way? And I'm a little bit, embarrassed to say that I've sat in meditation and made up conflict that didn't exist. So someone said something, they shouldn't have said it, and then I went and checked, and they didn't say it. And I was, got all worked up, right? So this process is process of getting worked up. And when I understood this about these lists of the conditional genesis of conflict, then I got excited. This is interesting because if you can go backwards from a most activated state and relax, and progressively relax and go through these layers and come to the place where we're no longer activated, no longer agitated, no longer contracted with our awareness. Come back to this place, here in this list, sense contact. That's not to disengage from the world, not to then, hide away in just the simplicity of sense contact, but something much more important can happen. And that is, once we get, maybe it's okay, I hope it's okay to use this word, once we get diffused, once we become disarmed, totally disarmed in the mind from all the conflict, all the things that lead up to conflict, then it's possible, if we know how, to access a profound place of knowing, a profound place of understanding, of thinking, of contemplation, a profound place of deep feelings that can arise well up from within, that are not feelings that are reactive to what the world is coming at us with. When we react to things, that's when we have anger, and that's when we have hostility, and that's when our conceit gets afraid. All kinds of things can happen there. But the premise in Buddhism is that we have tremendous sources within of wisdom, of love, of care, of harmony-making instincts to live in cooperation with others in the world, not to divide the world. And that this comes from a profound place within that is not in the reactive mode. So when we go through these lists of the genesis of conflict, and as a practitioners, and we're deactivating ourselves and come to, like in meditation, to some very simple place where we're just here in the present moment with our experience, that's the place where we can now ask ourselves, from here, how do I want to live? How do I want to respond to my friend who I got angry with, but I'm not angry now, I'm settled. The issue hasn't gone away. How can I address this so it involves the greater good for both of us? I'm hurt, I'm afraid, maybe my friend is as well. Let's not make it worse. Is there some way we can talk, something we can do? maybe we have to talk, but before we talk, maybe I'll send my friend a gift. And I'll bake some cookies or something, and just do something that bridges the divide. And then that sometimes we can do. But so then we get to the difficult topic that I probably is not suited, probably not going to address the emotional needs of some of the people involved in this deep issue in the Middle East. And but how I've been orienting myself in reading this, studying about this, is not to get fixated on military strategies and to read up about and consider all the kind of military strategies of what needs to happen and why it needs to happen and what is a just war and all these kinds of very painful things that people are involved in. But rather, I've been focused on those groups of people who are trying to look for the greatest good for everyone involved. The ones who are trying to not create more division, but create cooperation, create a sense of unification of people who are normally divided. And for this, some people say that it's very important to consider in the Middle East that Hamas doesn't represent all the Palestinians, that the Israeli government doesn't represent all Israelis, all Jewish Israelis. If we don't make that distinction, the level of divisiveness, the level of blame that gets spread is really difficult. And so there are people who are not doing this, but are actually coming together cooperatively from both sides. And this is what excites me. So the one that I kind of got the most excited by is an organization called Sisterhood. Sisterhood of Shalom Salam. Those are the two words for peace in Arabic and in Hebrew. And they write in their website, as a sisterhood of Jewish and Muslim women, we hold multiple truths at any given moment. It is possible for us to acknowledge that murdering civilians is a war crime, and firing missiles at civilians is also a war crime. It is possible for us to pray for the safe release of the 150 Israeli captives, when this was written, and pray for the safety of the besieged people of Gaza. It is possible for us to recognize that Palestinians are not Hamas and Israeli citizens are not their government. It is possible for us to grieve for our own dead and grieve for all those lost in this horrible cycle of violence, and be reminded that violence will always be met with more violence. At the same time, we have to choose compassion, which literally means suffering together and wishing to alleviate suffering. We must have compassion for all those who lost their family members, all those who are in captivity, and those seeking shelter from heavy artillery. Equally important, it is the feeling of compassion for each other and for our own tears, shock, pain, and fears. We truly are all suffering together at this moment. This is what it means to be human. This is what it means to possess moral clarity. It's a beautiful statement. There was a co-founder, was a woman named Cheryl Olitsky. I think she's a Polish Jew, from what she writes. But she, in writing about what inspired her to help start this organization, the Talmud, the Hebrew Bible, the Talmud asks, or oral law, who is a hero? And answers, one who makes one's enemy into a friend. Isn't that something? That's a hero. The rabbis communicated that it's possible to change people's attitudes and that it is desirable to strive to do so. And then Cheryl wrote, I knew I had to change attitudes. So this is what also Buddhism is doing. So this Buddhist attitude that I'm trying to offer here at IMC is not isolated to Buddhism. What she's calling from Talmud is very similar. And one who makes one's enemies into a friend. What a great thing. And the mission of this organization is based on our shared values. The mission of the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom is to build relationships between Muslim and Jewish women of all ages, to promote and advocate for human rights, and to end acts of hate for all human beings. We envision a world where Muslims and Jewish people live without hate, and where freedom, equality, and social justice are within reach for all of us. There's two more organizations that I want to read about. Another is an organization in Israel called Standing Together. It's a grassroots movement mobilizing Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel in pursuit of peace, equality, and social and climate justice. While the minority who benefit from the status quo of occupation and economic inequality seek to keep us divided, we know that we, the majority, have far more in common than that which sets us apart. When we stand together, we are strong enough to fundamentally alter the existing socio-political reality. The future that we want, peace and independence for Israelis and Palestinians, full equality for all citizens, and true social, economic, and environmental justice is possible. Because where there is struggle, there is hope. So I love that recognition that this takes work. This is not an easy thing to do. And but one of the things that I point out is that as difficult as creating peace this way is, it's probably a lot cheaper than all the money spent on arms. Does it take more time? I think it takes a lot more time than any given war. Much more difficult. But then it creates the conditions for a lasting peace. War creates the condition for more war. And that takes a lot of time. Sometimes I've seen, just in human interactions, over and over again, that if we don't take time to sit down to work out our differences, our conflicts, or all that, it festers and lasts a long time. But it's so inefficient, people. People are inefficient. And, to sit down and talk and work it out and work out our differences, it's such an inefficient process. I mean, who has time for that? We have a long to-do list. But I've seen over and over again that unless you take that time, there's so much more processing that happens later, and on and on and on. So it turns out to being inefficient sometimes is the most efficient. So the struggle. The last one I want to read is an interesting group in Israel called Combatants for Peace. Founded in 2006, it is a non-profit volunteer organization of ex-combatant Israelis and Palestinians, men and women who have laid down their weapons and rejected all means of violence. We are working together to end the occupation of Palestine, bring justice to the land, and demonstrate that Israelis and Palestinians can work and live together. We are a group of Palestinians and Israelis who have taken an active part in the cycle of violence in our region. Israeli soldiers serving in the Israeli Defense Force, and Palestinians as combatants fighting to free their country, Palestine from the Israeli occupation. We, serving our people, raised weapons which we aimed at each other and saw each other only through gun sights. We have established Combatants for Peace, on the basis of nonviolence principles. Isn't that remarkable? Mahatma Gandhi was most enthusiastic about former soldiers who joined his nonviolent efforts in India, because he said being nonviolent, it takes a lot of strength, a lot of courage, and the soldiers have it sometimes. And so I'm impressed by these. So these are 3 organizations. There's other organizations who are doing this kind of work. I think for the most part, these kinds of efforts don't make the front page. But I think they should. I think this should be championed and supported and brought forth. So to be concerned for the greater good of everybody involved, to be able to find a way to process our own fear, our own trauma, our own hurt, our own anger, in healthy, appropriate ways, to really bring out the best in each of us. And then to be able to be in a place, to want to be in a place where we live this life, where we're trying not to cause harm, to live nonviolently, trying to promote the welfare and happiness, the well-being of everyone. That's the kind of world I would like to live in. And is it naive to do so? I don't care. If this is the way I want to live, this is the world I want to live in, and I don't want to contribute to the opposite. I want to contribute to this, and I don't see, for me, there's any other choice. So that was my effort to say a few things, and I both am a little bit reluctant, but also feel maybe it's wise to see if there's any comments or questions anybody has. Yes, please. Can you wait for the mic? Because otherwise I won't hear.
Hold it like a rock star. Hold it like a rock star. Okay, then. No, I just was wondering if you could repeat the name of that second group so I could remember it.
Oh, yes, the Standing Together.
Thank you.
Standing Together. There's an organization called Stand Together that's in the United States, and then Standing Together is in Israel. Yes?
Yeah, it happened to be yesterday. I heard a mediator say something along these lines that you reminded me of, that when responding to someone who's angry, she said, it sounds like you really care about something.
Yeah.
I want to know what you care about.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, and then you kind of drop below, and eventually maybe you find some really great values that you share with them, but the application of it maybe has gone differently. So, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I hope this was close enough. I mean, I'm talking to a Buddhist audience, or not a Buddhist audience, but an audience who came to a Buddhist center to hear a Buddhist teacher. So I feel like I have some permission to do something unpopular, if that's the case. So, so there is a potluck today. Everyone's welcome to stay, whether you brought something or not. It's a wonderful way of being in community. If you're willing to take a couple of minutes, 5 minutes before the official ending, if you would be willing to turn to, you don't have to if you don't want to, but if you turn to maybe a couple of people next to you, so that everyone kind of look around and see who's there around you, so that no one's left alone, and say hello, and any thoughts about this talk or something.